The roar of the river was a constant, hungry sound, a backdrop to the peaceful afternoon until it was pierced by a single, sharp scream. Finn's head snapped up from the worn checkered blanket where his daughter, Hazel, was meticulously arranging pebbles into a smiling face. Across the grassy bank, a woman in a crisp white sundress stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes fixed on the churning water. A small flash of pink, a child's dress, was being tossed violently in the current. There was no time for thought, no room for hesitation. Finn was already moving. He kicked off his worn boots, the leather cracked from years of grease and labor, and shouted to his own daughter, "Hazel, stay right there. Don't move." Her wide, trusting eyes were locked on him, the pebble smile forgotten. He hit the shockingly cold water in a flat dive, the impact stealing his breath. The current was a brutal, muscular thing, far stronger than it looked from the shore. It grabbed him, pulling him downstream, but his years of swimming in this very river as a boy had taught him its secrets. He fought against the main pull, angling himself toward the struggling child. He could hear the mother's frantic, broken sobs from the bank. The little girl, her face pale with terror, went under. Finn pushed harder, his lungs burning, his arms aching with a desperate, primal strength. He saw the pink dress surface again, just feet away. He lunged, his fingers closing around the fabric of her sleeve. He got a firm grip under her arm, pulling her head above the surface. She coughed, sputtering water, her small body limp against his. Now came the harder part, getting them both back. The fight back to shore was a grueling battle against an invisible enemy. Finn wrapped one arm securely around the little girl, keeping her face clear of the waves, while his other arm clawed at the water, pulling them inch by agonizing inch toward the muddy bank. The girl, Amelia, was no longer struggling, her small frame trembling with cold and shock. He could feel her shallow breaths against his chest, a fragile rhythm that fueled his determination. He finally felt his feet drag against the rocky riverbed and he stumbled forward, half crawling, half carrying her out of the water's greedy grasp. He collapsed onto the grass, laying her down gently before rolling her onto her side. She coughed again, a torrent of river water spilling from her lips. Her mother was there in an instant, falling to her knees, her elegant dress now stained with mud and tears. "Amelia. Oh, my baby," she cried, pulling her daughter into a fierce, protective embrace. Finn pushed himself to a sitting position, his chest heaving, every muscle screaming in protest. Hazel ran to him then, her small hands patting his soaked back. "Daddy, you saved her," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. The woman, her face a mask of raw relief and gratitude, finally turned her attention to him. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, were wide and swimming with unshed tears. "Thank you," she breathed, the words barely audible over the river's roar. "Oh, God, thank you. You saved my daughter." She reached into her designer handbag, her hand shaking, and pulled out a thick leather wallet. "Please, I don't know what to say. Let me, what do I owe you?" "Name any price." "Anything." Finn slowly shook his head, pushing a wet strand of hair from his face. He looked from the terrified mother to the shivering child, then to his own daughter watching him with unwavering faith. "I don't want anything," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm just glad she's safe." Her name was Serafina Sterling. Finn learned that the next day when a sleek, black town car, southwest out of place it looked like a spaceship, pulled up to his small, cluttered auto garage. She stepped out, dressed not in a sundress but in a sharply tailored business suit that seemed to radiate power. She looked around the garage, at the greasy tools hanging on pegboards and the faint smell of oil that clung to everything, her expression unreadable. "Mr. O'Connell," she asked, her voice regaining the cool command he now suspected was its default state. He wiped his hands on an already stained rag. "Just Finn is fine," he said. "Is your daughter okay?" A flicker of warmth crossed her face. "She is. The doctor said she's perfectly fine, thanks to you." She held out a business card. "Serafina Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Innovations. I wanted to thank you properly." Finn glanced at the card. The name meant nothing to him, but the expensive embossed lettering spoke volumes. "Like I said, there's no need." She ignored his protest. "I can't simply walk away, Finn. You saved my child's life. My company has a charitable fund. We can make a significant donation to a cause of your choice. Or a trust for your daughter. Hazel, isn't it?" The offer hung in the air, a shimmering promise of a life without the constant, grinding worry about bills and rent. But it felt transactional, like payment for a service rendered, and what he had done didn't feel like a service. It felt human. "Hazel is fine," he said quietly, gesturing to a corner of the office where his daughter's colorful drawings were taped to a filing cabinet. "We're fine. But thank you for the offer, Miss Sterling." Her composure seemed to crack slightly. She was a woman accustomed to getting her way, to solving problems with money and influence. His simple refusal was a language she didn't quite understand. "Why?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine confusion. "Why won't you let me help you?" Finn picked up a wrench, its weight familiar in his palm. "Because some things aren't for sale." Serafina couldn't let it go. His quiet dignity was a puzzle she felt compelled to solve. 2 days later, the engine light on her luxury sedan, coincidentally, started flashing. She drove it to O'Connell's Auto, the only garage in the small town. Finn looked at the pristine vehicle, then back at her, a knowing glint in his eye, but he said nothing, simply nodding toward the service bay. While he worked, Serafina sat in the small, clean waiting area, a stark contrast to her glass-walled corner office. She watched him through the interior window. He moved with an unhurried competence, his hands, though stained with grease, were steady and sure. Hazel sat at a small table, diligently doing her homework, occasionally asking her father a question which he would answer with infinite patience. Amelia, who had insisted on coming, sat beside Hazel, the two of them whispering and giggling like old friends. This small, self-contained world of father and daughter felt more real, more grounded, than anything in her high-stakes life. When he was finished, he came in, wiping his hands. "Loose sensor wire," he said, showing her the small piece of plastic. "No charge." She opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off gently. "Professional courtesy." "For scaring your daughter." A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. "You're a difficult man to thank, Finn O'Connell." He just shrugged, a slight flush on his cheeks. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, the sounds of their daughter's laughter filling the space between them. For the first time since her brutal divorce, Serafina felt a stirring of something other than anxiety or ambition. It was a quiet, unfamiliar warmth, a sense of peace that emanated from this unassuming man and the simple, love-filled life he had built. She found herself wanting to know more about the men who wanted nothing but gave everything. Their strange courtship unfolded over oil changes and school pickups. Serafina found more and more reasons to be in the small town, extending her stay at the lodge under the guise of scouting new investment locations. She'd bring coffee to the garage in the mornings, and they would talk while he worked. He told her about his late wife, Sarah, and the ache of her absence that never truly faded. He spoke of his love for Hazel, the fierce, protective core of his entire existence. In return, Serafina found herself opening up in ways she never had before, not even with her closest friends. She spoke of the immense pressure of her job, the loneliness of leadership, and the gilded cage her marriage to Alastair Finch had been. Alastair, a man who saw their daughter Amelia not as a child to be loved, but as an asset to be managed, a reflection of his own status. One crisp autumn afternoon, the four of them went for a walk in the woods behind the garage. The girls ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the trees, while Finn and Serafina followed at a slower pace. "You're a good father, Finn," she said softly, watching him keep a protective eye on Hazel. He glanced at her, his expression serious. "It's the only thing I have to be." He stopped and pointed to a small, hand-carved bird perched on a branch. Sarah loved birds. "I carved that for her 1 year. I bring Hazel here sometimes, just to feel close to her." The vulnerability in his admission was a physical blow. She saw the deep well of grief he still carried, a burden he bore with quiet strength. In that moment, her admiration for him solidified into something deeper, something more profound. She saw not a mechanic, not a man beneath her station, but a man of immense moral and emotional fortitude. A man she was undeniably, terrifyingly, falling for. The peace was shattered by the arrival of a gleaming silver sports car that spat gravel as it skidded to a halt in front of the garage. A man in a suit that cost more than Finn's truck stepped out, his face a mask of cold fury. Alastair Finch. He stalked toward the open bay door where Finn was replacing a timing belt. "You," Alastair spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're the mechanic." Finn slowly straightened up, wiping his hands on his rag, his posture calm and steady. "Can I help you?" Alistair laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. I doubt it. I'm here to see Serafina. My daughter has been spending time in this hovel. I'm putting a stop to it. Just then, Serafina emerged from the office, her face pale. Alistair. What are you doing here? He ignored her, his eyes locked on Finn, sizing him up with blatant derision. So this is him. The local hero. Let me give you some advice, grease monkey. People like us don't mix with people like you. Whatever you think you're getting out of this, it's over. He pulled out a checkbook. Now, how much will it take for you to disappear? 5,000. 10. Name your price to crawl back under whatever rock you came from. The insult was designed to humiliate, to reduce Finn to a caricature of a desperate, poor man. Finn felt a hot surge of anger, but he looked past Alistair to Serafina's stricken face, and then to the office where their daughters were thankfully out of earshot. He met Alistair's cruel gaze without flinching. You can't buy my absence because it's not for sale, Finn said, his voice low and even. And you're right about one thing. People like you and people like me don't mix. Now I'd appreciate it if you left my place of business. For a second, Alistair looked genuinely stunned that he hadn't immediately crumpled. His fury intensified. You'll regret this, he hissed, turning his venom on Serafina. You both will. Alistair's threat was not idle. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at Serafina's lodge, delivered by a courier. Inside was a formal legal notice. Alistair was filing for an emergency modification of their custody agreement, seeking sole custody of Amelia. The petition was filled with vicious, calculated lies. It painted Serafina as an unstable and negligent mother, citing her inappropriate and dangerous association with a man of questionable character and low social standing. It twisted Finn's heroism into recklessness, suggesting he put both children in danger. It described his garage as a filthy and unsafe environment for a child. Every word was a poisoned dart aimed at the heart of Serafina's greatest fear, losing her daughter. She felt the blood drain from her face, the sterile legal language making her physically ill. Alistair was using their daughter as a weapon, and he was aiming it directly at her connection with Finn. Her lawyers were grim. Alistair had immense resources and a complete lack of scruples. A judge might see the surface-level optics, billionaire ex-husband versus small-town mechanic, and rule conservatively to avoid controversy. They advised her to distance herself from Finn immediately, to cut all ties, to present a clean, unassailable front. The choice was brutal. Her heart, which had just started to feel safe enough to open, was being forced back into its cage. She drove to the garage late that night, the legal papers feeling like a lead weight on the passenger seat. She found Finn cleaning up, the single bare bulb overhead casting long shadows. She couldn't hold back the tears as she explained the situation, her voice breaking. He's going to take her from me, Finn. He's using you to do it. She watched his face, expecting to see anger, or disappointment, or blame. Instead, his expression was one of profound sadness, not for himself, but for her. Finn listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving her face. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, the same terror he'd seen on the riverbank, but this time the current threatening to sweep her child away was made of paper and lies. When she finished, her shoulders slumped in defeat, he stepped closer. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a solid, comforting anchor in her storm. Then you do whatever you have to do to protect Amelia, he said, his voice imbued with a quiet, unshakable certainty. Whatever it takes. If that means you and I can't, if it means you have to walk away, you do it. Don't think about me. Don't think about anything but your daughter. Serafina stared at him, bewildered. You just let me go. After what he said about you. After everything. He gave a small, sad smile. What he says about me doesn't matter. It's just noise. But Amelia, she matters. A parent's first job, their only real job, is to protect their kid. I know that better than anyone. He finally reached out, his calloused, grease-stained thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The simple touch was more intimate than any kiss. You go fight for your little girl, Serafina. I'll be right here. In that moment of pure self-sacrifice, everything became clear to Serafina. Alistair's power was built on fear and intimidation. Finn's strength was built on love and integrity. The lawyers had told her to run from the fight, to appease the bully. But Finn, with his quiet courage, was showing her how to stand and fight for what was right, not just what was easy. He was willing to lose her to ensure her child was safe. And that was precisely why she knew she could never let him go. A new resolve hardened within her, replacing fear with cold, clear anger. "No," she said, her voice suddenly strong. "We fight for her. Together." The meeting was set in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in a high-rise law office that smelled of money and arrogance. Alistair and his two lawyers sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, radiating smug confidence. Serafina sat opposite them, her own legal team flanking her. The door opened, and Finn walked in, dressed not in his work clothes but in a simple, clean button-down shirt and jeans. He looked entirely out of place, yet completely at ease. Alistair scoffed audibly. "What is he doing here?" "This is a private legal matter, not a barn-raising." Serafina looked directly at her ex-husband, her gaze like ice. "Finn is here because he is central to this matter." "You made him central, Alistair," Alistair's lawyer began. "Miss Sterling, our petition is clear. Your judgment is compromised. You are exposing your daughter to an unstable element." Serafina held up a hand, silencing him. "No, let's talk about judgment." She slid a thick binder across the table. "This is a dossier my team compiled on your own stability, Alistair. Including transcripts of your verbal abuse, documented threats, and a very interesting pattern of offshore accounts you forgot to mention during our divorce settlement." Alistair's face went rigid. But Serafina wasn't finished. "But that's not what this is about. This is about character." She placed a second, smaller folder on the table. "These are sworn affidavits. From the lodge staff who saw you scream at Amelia for getting mud on her shoes. From a dozen local people attesting to Finn's character. And from the paramedics who arrived at the river, whose report states that Finn's quick, selfless action, without any regard for his own safety, unequivocally saved my daughter's life." She stood up, her voice ringing with power. "You tried to use this good man's character as a weapon against me. So I've decided to turn it into a shield. Effective immediately, I am announcing the formation of the Sterling Foundation for Community Heroes. Its first act will be to build a new youth center for this town. Its founding grant," she paused, looking at Finn with a soft smile, "is the reward he so graciously refused." Alistair was stunned into silence, his face a mottled mix of fury and disbelief. He had expected Serafina to crumble, to retreat, to sacrifice Finn to save herself. He never imagined she would go on the offensive, weaponizing the very decency he'd tried to mock. He had come to the meeting armed with power and money, but she had come armed with truth and character, and in that sterile conference room, there was no contest. His lawyers shuffled their papers, their confident postures deflating. They saw the shift in power as clearly as he did. The threat of exposing his financial misdeeds was potent, but the public narrative she had just created was devastating. The story of the cruel billionaire trying to punish the hero who saved his child, while the grateful mother honored him, was a public relations nightmare Alistair could not survive. He had lost. He knew it. Serafina sat back down. "So, you can withdraw your petition for custody," she stated, not asked, "and we can finalize a new agreement that ensures you will never use our daughter as a pawn again. Or, we can proceed, and all of this," she gestured to the binders, "becomes a matter of public record. Your choice." The fight was over before it truly began. Defeated and exposed, Alistair silently nodded to his lawyer, who formally withdrew the motion. Finn, who had remained silent throughout, watched the entire exchange with a quiet, steady gaze. He wasn't looking at Alistair, he was looking at Serafina, seeing the fierce, brilliant, and courageous woman she truly was. As they left the building and stepped into the sunlight, Serafina finally let out a shaky breath she felt like she'd been holding for weeks. She turned to Finn, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "For showing me how to be brave." He simply took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. It felt like coming home. The garage, the river, the conference room, they were all just places. Home was this. The quiet strength shared between them.